Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show. Hope you're having a great day from the Citizens Bank studio. We have a jam-packed show today. We have Jeff Duncan to start out with, then JT Mitchell from SuperTalk Mississippi News. And then there's a really special effort around Mother's Day that's going to happen in Jackson. For the last segment, we'll talk a little bit about that community effort. Without any further ado, let's move over to Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. And first of all, just say good morning. How you doing, Jeff?
Ricky, I'm doing great. Great to see you as always.
Well, listen, we're going to spend most of the time today, if not all the time, talking about Steve Gleason's new book, A Life Impossible, Living with ALS, Finding Peace and Wisdom Within a Fragile Existence, by Steve Gleason with Jeff Duncan. And, we'll kind of start with, first of all, the reviews, including the New York Times. The reviews have been what you would hope for with a book like this, haven't they?
Yeah, we're actually very humbled by the reaction so far. Sales have been great, and we're starting to get out now, publicly make appearances this week in the New Orleans area. And so far, everyone we've talked to has been very gracious. So look, it's a very I'm very grateful to, as I've said before, to have a chance to work on a project like this. And at the end, this is the fourth book I've produced, and every time, Ricky, it's the same way. This is the rewards of all the labor of 2 years of work. So it's really nice for me to get to see Steve and Michelle enjoy the fruits of their labor, because it's a challenge putting out a book, especially with the limitations Steve has from ALS. So to see him finally, get on the positive, see all the positive response to the book has been really gratifying for me.
In a way, the regular listeners of this show have been on this journey with you, because you've been talking about it, and we've been, sharing some of the chapters along the way, chapters in the book writing, not in the actual book itself. But, I came across this quote, ironically, this morning, actually, because I'm always looking for quotes to share on the show. And I think I saw this one many years ago, but it's a Voltaire quote, and it says, "Every man is guilty of all the good he did not do." Every man is guilty of all the good he did not do. And the point is that we all leave something on the table. We should all be looking for ways that we can inspire and help others, that, we're human, we're human, and empathy and sharing, and we're here on earth such a short period of time in the scheme of what we know, about human history. We should make our impact. But I thought about Steve when I read that. Every man is guilty of all the good he did not do. Steve is determined to leave nothing on the table, isn't he?
Correct. And let me just give you an example of how he kind of is always looking out for the other person. He has a greeting, and we talk about, actually, the GQ review of our book focused a lot on this, what he calls foe to foe. And what it means is forehead to forehead. Steve invented this greeting. You might have seen it on the cover of the Times-Picayune when Drew Brees greeted him. We have this really poignant photo of Drew Brees and Steve kind of forehead to forehead. And the reason Steve invented that is because he recognized over the years that it's awkward when you come up to him. He can't move. So you don't know what to do. And so he created this. I mean, you can't shake his hand, right? It's not normal human interaction. He recognized this. And so as a way of trying to relieve that anxiety in people, he created this forehead to forehead exchange. And it's just so thoughtful of the other person. That's what he always does when he speaks in public. He almost immediately has a joke that relieves some of the anxiety in the crowd, because it's unusual for him to be speaking through a computer system, and he realizes that. So he throws in an early joke, and it just kind of melts away. And he's always thinking of the other person. It just shows you, the way he's wired.
Hey, Jeff, you and I were talking about the Saints had sent a note over to Steve with some questions, and you're in the loop on that. And Would you mind? I mean, we'll cover what we can, but I wanted to, I think there are a couple of excerpts from the book that we might consider sharing today. But for people who have not paid close attention to the depth of inspiration that will come from this book and sort of what's in Steve's mind these days, how he thinks about things, why don't you share some of what you guys are going to be sending over to the Saints.
Yeah, and I would say this is not just the Saints. These are questions that are asked to Steve naturally, right? Like,
yeah, okay.
When we go to book signings, people want to know, why did you write this book? Why? And that's the first answer he gave in this response. And I'm sure it's one that he's used before, maybe not just to the Saints, but in response to other Q&As that he's done. He said, the impetus for writing this book was to share what I feel is a human story. This isn't a heroic story or an after-school special. It's real. And my intention in writing it was to share the connection that we all have. We all experience adversity. We all encounter heart-crushing loss, and we all experience suffering. This is a book about seeing adversity as the ultimate opportunity to grow stronger and better, then to discover the extraordinary within each of our own hearts, minds, and spirit. So that's in essence why he decided to write the book. And as you can see, doesn't mention football at all, right? I mean, this book is about so much more than just sports. There's great chapters in there about Steve's sports career and about the block punt. You'll get insight. He'll take you inside that night, what he did after blocking the punt, how he celebrated out in New Orleans. So there's some great stuff in there for football fans, but it really, I think you're going to get more than that from this book.
There was a part in the book, actually, where he shared the letter he wrote to friends once he got his ALS diagnosis. There's a lot in that letter that is heart-wrenching, but you had to keep in mind first of all, Steve Gleason, the famous block punt in 2006 when they reopened the dome. I was so pleased to be there, to have seen that incredible moment. And, the memory of that moment and his role in that moment was seared in all of our memories. And to find him go on to discover he has ALS and to be a traveler of the world, even after he was diagnosed, and the work that he did to continue to broaden his mind and experience life. This is a special dude, going into this diagnosis, wasn't it?
Yeah, let me read what he said about the block punt. I think that's a good segue, because it kind of gives you insight into who he was like. He says, the post-Katrina block punt was the kind of moment you dream about your entire life, being in front of tens of thousands of fans in the stadium and millions of fans on TV and doing something of great consequence. I did it, and I love that I did it. That's why we watch sports and why we play sports, for a moment like that. I love the people of New Orleans, and for me to get a chance to give them that much joy was extraordinarily special. For many people, it's the only thing in my playing career that they remember me for, and that's cool with me. I'm the little kid who dreamed of playing in the NFL and doing something great, and that night I did. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll never forget it, man, because what happened, it was like sticking your finger in a plug. Yeah. It electrified the audience in this jolting way that never let up for the rest of the game, man. It was unbelievable, wasn't it?
Oh, look, I go back to that night all the time. I don't know if I'll ever see another night, because there was so much emotion in the crowd just to begin the game. The pregame show with U2 and Green Day and Irma Thomas and Trombone Shorty, all this incredible music and all the stars that were there that night. There were 2 presidents in the building and all kinds of celebrities on the sidelines. And all the first responders were the first people allowed into the stadium. There was just so much more than just football on the line that night. And the pent-up emotion and excitement from the pregame show there was still a buzz. If you think about it, Ricky, the punt block came a minute and a half into the game. You just think through all the games you've watched in your life, you don't see a punt block that early. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So I think it shocked everyone so much. It was such an unusual time for that to happen in the game. Right after 3 plays by the Falcons, you get this punt block and a touchdown. It just touched off an incredible reaction from the fans. And a lot of people say it'll never be that loud again.
Well, the pain and suffering of the entire Gulf region. And as we've said so many times before, the Saints are just not New Orleans or Louisiana's team. It's the Gulf region's team. And we were all going through so much pain. And here we are now celebrating the reopening of the Superdome and that amazing moment. it's almost like divine intervention in a way, because Steve blocks that punt, electrifies the crowd, sears that memory into our minds, and then he goes on to have ALS and to be such a deep and philosophical thinker about everything. And now to be able to convey a sense of hope from his condition is amazing when you think about it, isn't
right.
it?
No, you're spot on. I couldn't say it better myself. I say all the time, Steve could have written a book without playing in the NFL and without his journey with ALS. He's such a compelling, interesting person and a deep thinker that he'd be worthy of a book regardless. But to have all these experiences in his lifetime, it's just, there's so many life lessons in there. And one of our reviewers real quick said, this isn't an autobiography, it's a gift. And I think it's a great way to put it.
I think it is. When we come back, we'll share the letter that he wrote to his friends when he discovered he had ALS. We'll continue after this break with my friend Jeff Duncan. See you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune is with us today. And when we went to break, we were talking about A Life Impossible, written by Steve Gleason with Jeff Duncan, and how inspiring it's going to be. Certainly, we know who Steve Gleason is. I think the world will know who Steve Gleason is as a result of the hopeful message. So let's go back to the letter that was shared in the book that he wrote to his friends once he learned he had ALS, to give you a sense of just how good a writer Steve really is.
Yeah, so this is January 5th, 2011, after he had been diagnosed out in San Francisco, California, at the leading ALS Institute, the Forbes Norris Institute for ALS in San Francisco, where he got the official diagnosis. And he kind of knew, the family kind of knew this is what he was the news he was going to receive. But nevertheless, you finally get this terminal diagnosis. I mean, ALS is a terminal disease, so you can imagine the gravity of that. Michelle flew back to New Orleans earlier that day, so Steve was out there by himself with his brother, and he wrote this letter to his inner circle. I'll just start right here. Well, let's get to it. Yesterday, I met with one of the best ALS physicians in the world, and he had diagnosed me with ALS. I've spoken with everyone on this email chain in the last few weeks, so I think most of you know the deal. The deal is that nearly all diagnoses are terminal. Our doctor mentioned 3 cases of conditions stabilizing, but the average lifespan is 2 to 3 years post-diagnosis, which puts a slight detour in my plan to live to 109. I intended to write some inspiring piece about staying optimistic and beating this diagnosis with the same determination and persistence that kept me in the NFL. People like hearing that. Deep down inside myself, I believe that is true. But I want to be honest with you. I'm very scared and frustrated. I don't feel like beating anything. I don't feel like doing anything or keeping my chin up or calling more doctors or taking prescription drugs or joining a support group or figuring out health insurance or revising my will or going to church or being blessed by the Pope or wearing magnets or eating bird food or clearing chakras. I feel like being depressed, and I feel like crying. I feel like kicking someone's teeth in or having my own teeth kicked in. I feel like pinching myself and waking up. I feel like screaming. I feel like flipping God the finger. I feel like feeling sorry for myself. I feel like running away to the moon. You see, in reality, our bodies are saucy meat sacks that break down and die. Fighting and persevering and persisting and determining and optimisticing and chin-upping don't work for everybody. But at least 3 times it has worked. So feeling better about being honest with a few of you who are on this email, I promise to fight and believe and expect the extraordinary and smile and laugh and cry and love our lives for every breath that remains in my body. Please, please help me do that until I'm 109. Steve Gleason.
Man, that's incredible. He went into this with an amazing amount of self-awareness. And when I said philosophical, I really do mean deeply philosophical. Like when he visited places, he didn't just go to see the sights. He visited places to be touched in his soul. And that is who he is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the phrase he uses all the time is keep exploring. And I see that applied in all manner of his life. He explores life emotionally, mentally, physically. He used to explore life with his adventure travel and surfing and hiking. And now he has to explore life in different ways because of the disease. And he's found ways to do it through reading and writing. And that's what this book was about.
Yeah. So hey, Jeff, we talked about this a little bit during your journey of writing this book with him. But how did this book change you?
Well, it's a good question, and it certainly has changed me. I mean, it gives you perspective on life for sure. Steve's relationship with Michelle and his family, the love story, which is a thread throughout part of the narrative arc of the book, is certainly something that's touched me. I see the power of that love between them and his family, and it really does kind of crystallize what's important in life. When you get down to the brass tacks of what he's had to go through, it does kind of distill down what the importance of our lives are. So I think Steve's story, there's a life lesson in it that applies to everyone. Whatever adversity you have, certainly he has one of the ultimate challenges in dealing with a terminal disease, but that's still the way he's embraced the challenge is certainly a great life lesson for all of us when we have difficulties in our own lives. So this book, for me, writing it with him and getting to know him and seeing how he's wired and his extraordinary sheer will to survive, this has changed my life. I mean, I'll be able to encounter so much more. I'm so much stronger for having written this book with him, being alongside him on this journey.
What's interesting, I'm a big student of Steve Jobs, and so things that he shared as he approached his last days, one of the things he shared was this. In fact, I've got an upcoming conversation with Robbie D'Angelo, and we're gonna focus on all this a little bit more specifically. But he says there's a big difference between a human being and being human. Only a few really understand it. Being human requires having compassion, empathy, and honesty. Those are not hard traits for us to practice each day. And his point is we just need to do it. But, I guess when you're in that frame of mind, it reminds you what in life is important. I mean, a lot of people who face death, who face difficult times, they say the same thing when they emerge from it in a way that they understand where they are and what they want their impact to do, or what they want their impact to be. But there is a big difference between being a human being and being human, isn't there?
Yes, I mean, Steve's got a phrase he uses a lot where he said people always ask him, "What's your timeline with this disease? What's your timeline?" He goes, "You know what? I've got a timeline, and you've got it. We've all got a timeline." But we don't live like we have a timeline. And none of us really know what our timeline is. So his point is live every day to its fullest because you really, truly don't know. And I think it's a great life lesson as well on how to live your life. Because this book is a very inspiring book. I know it could sound, it's like a sad story, but it's not. I mean, there's times you're going to cry and if you read the book. But there's many more instances of joy and laughter. And I think really gratitude. Steve manages to find gratitude in his life despite this enormous challenge.
Well, you said it, and it was certainly in that letter, this notion of living to 109 and that, that plan being somehow abruptly changed. But the way he brings, some, smart, he's a very smart guy. So smart people have a tendency to have a good sense of humor. Yeah. It is interesting that he's found that still in his current state.
No, I mean, I think it's a help, also a little bit of a coping mechanism for him and his care crew. I mean, if you go over and spend time with Steve during the day, I mean, his care crew, they make fun of him. They take jabs at him. I mean, it's just part of how they get through the experience. They have to have that. I mean, there's a funny part of the book where Steve they have a skylight in their house. Well, to operate Steve's wheelchair, he has to use eye tracking technology, and sunlight will interrupt that infrared beam and cause him to not be able to operate. So many times he'll be tooling around in his wheelchair and get into the sunlight, and it'll stop him. He'll get stuck in the sunlight, and no one will know it. He'll sit there for 10 minutes by himself. And you think that's sad, but it's not. It's funny. They all come in there and make fun of him, and he'll be smiling about being stuck under the sunlight when no one else is around. So there's funny moments like that where Steve finds humor in his plight.
You know, one of the things I noticed, like I take in videos and photographs that have been shared from the Jazz Fest, is how well, at least from what I could see, how well the kids have adjusted to this. Of course, they've never known anything different, but still, they seem to have adjusted well to it.
Yeah, and we talk about that in the book of how that's affected. That's something Steve and Michelle have thought about, have worked on, like how that's going to affect their lives. And I think you're exactly right. They've been incredibly, they adjusted very well to having a dad that's different. And that's something that Steve thinks about all the time. How can I be a fully adequate father in my condition? And I think he's done a remarkable job of that.
It's sweet to see. It's sweet to see. The other thing that he's commented about this on X recently, but this notion of embracing the uncertainty of promoting this book and, being out in public and being in certain situations, going to Jazz Fest, being around large crowds. But he's really embraced that, hasn't he?
Well, that's Steve. I mean, he doesn't hold back. I mean, just last few weeks, he's gone out and had an art exhibition on St. Charles Avenue. He was at Jazz Fest every day. I mean, I can't go to Jazz Fest every day. You can't keep him out of there every day. Now we're beginning our book signings and our book tour, and he embraces it. I mean, that's the thing I try to tell people. He's not just, surviving ALS. He's living with ALS, and he's getting out and doing things. I mean, we're going to fly to Washington, D.C. in a couple of weeks for an event. So, yes, he's definitely living a full life.
So it's amazing. Thanks for sharing those insights with us. And go buy the book, A Life Impossible. You can get it on Amazon or however you purchase your books. I think you'll be glad you did. Listen, Jeff, thank you for spending some time with me.
My pleasure, Ricky. Thank you for having me always.
You bet. JT Mitchell, news director for SuperTalk Mississippi News, will be joining us after this.